Hello. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get the program started. To start off, I have one housekeeping note to share with all of you. The reception tonight at Antone's, you must have your CCAS badge to get in. And the space is limited, so they won't be able to accommodate guests. Now it's my privilege to welcome Chris Parrish on behalf of Podium, our local partner sponsor, to share a few remarks.
Thank you all. Sure. First off, thank you to CCAS for allowing us to sponsor this wonderful conference. We sort of bumped into Amber by happenstance a year and a half ago, and it's just a really good marriage of sorts between what we care about and what so many of y'all care about as well. So it's great to be here in our hometown, Podium's hometown of Austin, Texas. Our headquarters is about a mile down the road. So I have three local pieces of advice for you here. If you like cold beer, there's a place called Rustic Tap down the street that's pretty good. If you like tacos, there's a taqueria called Taqueria 10 out of 10 down the street that's like authentic Central Mexican tacos. And if you like to work out, come find me. I'll give you my personal address, and you'll have an invite from me to come wrestle my 4-year-old, my 2-year-old to bed every night this week, which is my fun pleasure. But in all seriousness, we started Podium in 2019 here in Austin. In 2019, the national drumbeat around questioning the ROI on a 4-year degree was starting to pick up. It is obviously at a fever pitch today. Y'all read a lot of the same news stories that I read. And as a former first-generation college student myself, I am a huge proponent of the power of a 4-year degree and what it can do in terms of changing your own trajectory. But I also recognize that the cost of college has gone up quite a bit. And that's why I'm so proud that we have 83 universities now at Podium that have adopted our experiential learning platform called the Global Career Accelerator. Many of you are in this room, and we're grateful for your partnership. Across those 80-plus universities, they've embraced this new model of allowing their undergraduate students to work on projects directly with our industry partners that include Nike, Intel, Airbnb on their path to graduation. Across those partners, this year, we'll have 15,000 students complete our program called the Global Career Accelerator. 40% of those students are Pell, and over half are first-generation college students. If you are, yeah, we can clap for that one. It's pretty cool. If you're a dean that has experiential learning in your vision, or career integrated learning, career connected learning, come find us. We're at the Podium Lounge, which is out this way, turn right, and we're gonna have a special coffee bar set up at 2:30 this afternoon, and we'll be around. We'd love to meet you if we don't know you, and if we do know you, we'd love to see you, okay? Hope you all have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now it is my honor to introduce our plenary luncheon speaker, Bryan Alexander. I had the privilege of a wonderful and wide-ranging dinner conversation with Bryan last night, a happy occasion of discovering a kindred spirit. Bryan Alexander is an award-winning, internationally known futurist, researcher, writer, speaker, consultant, and teacher working in the field of higher education's future. He completed his English language and literature PhD at the University of Michigan in 1997 with a dissertation on doppelgangers in romantic era fiction and poetry. Then Bryan taught literature, writing, multimedia, and information technology studies at Centenary College of Louisiana. There, he also pioneered multi-campus interdisciplinary classes while organizing an information literacy initiative. From 2002 to 2014, Bryan worked with the National Institute for Technology in Liberal Education, a nonprofit working to help small colleges and universities best integrate digital technologies. He held several roles at this institute, including co-director of a regional education and technology center, director of emerging technologies, and senior fellow. Over those years, Bryan helped develop and support the nonprofit, grew peer networks, consulted, and conducted a sustained research agenda. In 2013, Bryan launched a business, Bryan Alexander Consulting LLC, through which he consults throughout higher education in the United States and abroad. Bryan speaks widely and publishes frequently, with articles appearing in venues that include The Atlantic Monthly, Inside Higher Ed. He has been interviewed by and featured in a whole host of venues that you would recognize. I'll mention just a few: the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, Wall Street Journal, US News and World Report, National Public Radio. Bryan's book, Academia Next: The Future of Higher Education, published by Johns Hopkins University Press 2020, won an Association of Professional Futurists Award. His latest book, Universities on Fire: Higher Education in the Age of Climate Crisis, appeared in 2023. He's currently working on Peak Higher Ed: How to Survive the Emerging Academic Crisis, under contract with Johns Hopkins. His other books include Gearing Up for Learning Beyond K-12 and the New Digital Storytelling, second edition. Bryan is currently a senior scholar at Georgetown University and teaches graduate seminars in their Learning, Design, and Technology program. A word about the format of this presentation. Bryan will start off by speaking for about 20 minutes, followed by a very brief Q&A. At 1 o'clock, Bryan will begin hosting his weekly live webcast, Future Trends Forum, from the stage. Bryan will continue this webcast until 2 p.m., but please feel free to leave at 1:45 for your afternoon sessions, which will begin then. You will have further opportunities for Q&A and discussion with Bryan tomorrow morning in a special concurrent session at 9 a.m. titled Deans, AI, Climate Change, and the Future, an open discussion. Now, please join me in welcoming Bryan.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. Especially, you were there to prove that you don't have to have a beard to be on this stage. Can you hear me in the back all right? A few hands went up, a few were like, no, that's all right. Let me just take a quick couple of pictures of all of you for posterity. It's an honor to be able to speak to all of you today, especially over lunch, because that will hopefully mean you will associate being fed and feeling good with my words, which is especially important to me. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to meet CCAS, and I'm also grateful to the sponsors for helping make it available. I'm going to be talking about the subject of my most recent book, which is Academia and Climate Change. I also want to brag that the wonderful American Association of Colleges and Universities just announced they would be giving an award this January, so I'm doing this partly to say hello, Lynn, and thank you. But also because I want to explain a bit about this work. As a futurist, I track more than 100 different trends. Everything from economics to technology, to looking at campus finance, to demographics. And you can see here with this slide a few of the things I track. But right now, I'm going to talk about one single trend alone, which is perhaps the most powerful trend reshaping not just education, but also the planet right now. This is a screenshot from the University of Maine's Climate Reanalyzer, and it's measuring the surface temperature of the world. And if you look really carefully through it, the gray and black lines are the temperature in the past, going back about 30, 40 years. The bright yellow-orange line is last year's temperature, and the fiery red jagged line is this year's temperature. And with a glance, you can simply see that the temperature is increasing and not slowing down at all. So why should you be talking about this? Why should you be thinking about this when you're talking about enrollment, state policies, the election, student sports, curricular transformation? Let me give you a few reasons, and then I'm going to walk you through some of the impacts, and then I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. So to begin with, depending on where you are institutionally, as well as financially and politically, your institution may be subject to different risks from manifold aspects of the climate crisis. A second is that as part of a general social response to the climate crisis, you may play a role. And a third is that higher education has unique contributions to give to the civilizational response to global warming. A fourth is that your faculty and staff will need professional support in order to do that kind of work. A fifth is that when it comes to students, you may have strategic advantages in grappling with climate change. And last is that we're all called to respond to climate change, and academia should be part of that. So really quickly, let me just race through a couple of these points. And this is a huge subject, so I'm just going to try and hit some of the major highlights. One of them is the thinking about the impacts of climate directly. So you may be subject to everything from natural disasters to temperature changes. On a second level, you may get knock-on effects as the environment changes. And the third is impacts that come from how humans respond. So, for example, it's easy to find maps like this, which try to forecast what will happen to coastlines under sea level rise. I would just direct your eyes to a few different features. Anybody here from Florida? Hi. Sorry about that. But also anybody from the East Coast, like myself. I mean, you just run your eye along the East Coast to see Norfolk, now an island. Look what happens to New York. Look what happens to Boston. Look at Louisiana, a new inland sea. California gets 2 new inland bodies of water. This is just one forecast. There are many such examples of this. And it's a principle. In the climate crisis world, the areas that have too much water will get more water. And this plays out in different locations. Here's a quick glimpse of Miami-Dade County. I just put all the universities and campuses that are near a few blocks away from the Atlantic Ocean. You can think as well about our infrastructure. These are glimpses of some of our major fiber that connects our internet to the world, and you can see they're located at coastal locations, which makes them very vulnerable. The opposite of this, of having too much water, is that if you don't have enough water, you'll have even less. So this is a map just quickly looking at desertification and arid areas around the world. And all those fiery red, orange, and yellow areas have lots and lots of colleges and universities. If you take a look at the United States, once you start going west of the Mississippi, you can see the problem. Biological effects happen as well, and these aren't often talked about. This is a map right now of the spread of Lyme disease. Lyme disease is named after the town of Lyme, Connecticut, where it was originally found and discovered, but global warming has made the deer tick that carries Lyme disease move around a bit. So it's carried Lyme disease across the Northeast and into the Midwest. This is just one sample of some of the biological effects to think about. You could also think if you're coastal, the water you get, your fresh water table, will increasingly become infiltrated by salt water, which means that some of the plants that you now raise and the animals that feed on them won't be able to live. And instead, mangroves like this will become more popular. Human effects continue to ramify. So thinking, for example, about climate anxiety. You've heard that Generation Z is majorly afflicted with this, but you've also heard that many people are thinking about it. Psychologists have come up with the term solastalgia to describe what happens when you lose the natural environment of your childhood. Political changes as well. This is one of my favorite photographs from the second decade of the 21st century. It's not a great photograph technically, but it's the only one where you could see Trump and Greta Thunberg face to face, and neither of them is happy. I put this here because obviously climate is politically very, very fraught, and people argue about this and have different ways of responding, all of which impact higher education, from federal policy to state policy, city and county. And the politics of this just continue to go further and further. We're not sure how to organize the human response. We have more international organizations. Will we strengthen the UN? Anyway, on campus, here are a few of the levels of intersection. And by the way, quick show of hands. Am I going too fast, too slow, just right? Okay. So this colorful chart breaks this down to a few of the different levels. One of them is the physical campus impact. A second is the research mission. A third is the teaching and learning mission. And a fourth is your community engagement. So let me just quickly touch on these. The physical campus connection to climate change is really, really complex, and it's hard to find an end to it. Think, for example, about where you get your electrical power. Most campuses outsource it. A lot of outsourcing goes to utilities that burn coal or gas or fossil fuels or other forms in order to provide electricity. Do you resource your electrical power? Berea College in Kentucky, for example, resourced all of their power to a couple of hydro plants just down the road. Think about your buildings. All the buildings in the US right now have, to some extent, some carbon footprint. Do you renovate, redesign, tear down, build new buildings in order to reduce that carbon footprint? Thinking about LEED and STAR certification. Your on-campus transportation, your own shuttle fleet, your own cars that take people back and forth. Are they electrified? People who visit your campus, do you incentivize them to come in EVs, or do you disincentivize them to come from fossil fuel burning cars? Do you relocate your campus? Those Florida campuses I mentioned before, sorry to pick on you, do they think about moving north or west in order to get out of the way of the rising water? Your food systems, if you have a delicious lunch like this one here, to what extent does your food system on campus have a carbon footprint and a methane footprint? And beyond that, your IT departments. Do you think about greening your IT department? That is, do you reduce your IT department so that it uses less carbon dioxide, or do you expand it in order to take care of other carbon footprints you have? Think about your whole campus as having a kind of baseline resilience in the face of climate storms. That's just the physical campus. If you think about your research mission, the research mission of universities and colleges is in many ways our biggest contribution to the climate crisis right now. If you look at the big IPCC reports, they're crammed with university faculty doing research. And already this is a great contribution to have. You should expect your faculty to do more of this research over time. And you can think about some fields that might expand or change. So they may also contract if they don't grapple with this enough. You might see new domains start to appear, such as climate change management or the ethics of climate change. How do you support these faculty becomes quite an issue. Do you, for example, have a provost or dean-like fund for professional development? Do you have a center on campus? Do you have a department or a program that's non-departmental? And moreover, when faculty are researching material beyond the climate crisis, their research materials may be subject to it. If they have an archive in sub-Saharan Africa or in central Mexico, for example, it might not exist much longer if they can't pay the electrical bills to keep it cool. If your faculty are scientists researching certain natural areas, as those natural areas mutate and change, how do you preserve that? If you have an archaeologist who's trying to research a thousands of year old site, and that site is in danger of being flooded or burned, how do you preserve that? Do you pay for your faculty to digitize that? Or do you try and convince them that they may have to move on? You may reach out to interinstitutional groups too, like ASHE, for help for this. When I started doing this research, I was really afraid of topics that would get people very upset. And I thought food and climate change would be the one that would be the third rail, and I was completely wrong. The thing that drives people the most upset about climate change is the idea of flying less. We know that air travel is absolutely horrendous for climate change. We don't have anything like EVs for airplanes right now. And in the US, our air travel has shot back up beyond where it was before COVID. So do you fly less? Do you encourage faculty to fly less? Do you try and replace those trips with virtual engagements, for example? Now think about your teaching mission. This is in many ways what most people think of the main virtue of higher education, our main function. And if we think about the curricula, we already teach climate change to different degrees. Some of you may yourself have done this in the past. We have programs in environmental studies, in earth studies, for example. You should expect that to simply increase. And if you think about your students, if you think about traditional age undergrads that come from a background of being very focused on climate change, they have a crying demand for more learning about that. In economic terms, perhaps you can supply that demand. Moreover, this is not a disciplinary subject. Climate change is massively transdisciplinary. It involves the humanities as we try to figure out ways of thinking through the ethics and the communication of climate. It involves all the social sciences as we try to figure out the economic, the anthropological, the politics of this transformation. So perhaps you can think about all of climate change as the new liberal arts. Furthermore, if your campus has a social justice orientation, if you're interested in serving the underserved, perhaps you should think about making more of your curriculum available in open educational resource format or in mobile device-friendly format, because those are the formats that really benefit people who are marginalized. And beyond that, do you think about offering new academic forms, new degrees, or even new certificates? As you'll see in about half an hour, certificates are growing right now across the US. That's just what we teach. In terms of how we teach, there's a whole body of pedagogy about how to teach climate change. So we think, for example, about students who not only come to you with climate anxiety, but will over the years increasingly come to you with some form of climate experience or trauma. How do you honor that experience and that background without re-traumatizing them? That's a crucial pedagogical question. Moreover, how do you teach them in a way that improves their mental health? Colorado College, for example, had a great program where students who were interested in climate could go off campus, live in climate-friendly housing, and do some kind of hands-on project. The president there told me that their students reported increases in mental health. Think about that. Turning around the mental health crisis in a positive way. Moreover, there are other pedagogical dimensions. We know that project-based and inquiry-based learning is excellent for being able to get a whole bunch of complex systems together in one spot. We also know that gaming and simulations can do that. Here's one quick example. This is a website called En-ROADS, where you can basically fiddle with a control panel of the entire planet and how it plays out in terms of climate change. You could add or subtract burning coal, changing forestation, and so on. What you see here is my attempt to model some of the impacts of the Trump administration. Now, I just took a few seconds to describe it. Using this tool takes less time than that to be able to figure out how to use it. My point is, there are a lot of such tools that can be used. How do you support that on your campus? Perhaps even more in a positive sense, we have to think about the impact of climate change on careers. There are lots of careers to think about. There are pre-existing jobs and professions that are ever more in demand. So you think about electrical engineering as we try to overhaul our entire national grid. But there are also new and emerging jobs, helping companies manage climate change, how to change the supply system, and so on. You have to wonder to what extent your campus is preparing your students for careers in those fields. On top of this, you have to think about jobs that are not climate change jobs per se, but that are impacted by it. So, for example, a lot of journalists have been talking about all of journalism being climate journalism right now. Not that all reporters become environmental reporters, but if you're reporting on finance, on sports, on politics, and culture, your subject matter is increasingly impacted by it. Now, I've been talking about this as though it's a rational topic where everybody agrees and comes together and rationally determines the outcome. This is not always going to be the case. Obviously, higher education is very contentious. Obviously, climate change is very contentious. But you can see here, we also have generational gaps. If your campus decides to start a process for a study that will re-examine its climate change approach over a 5 to 10 year period, do you think the young woman holding up this sign will be satisfied with that? Here's another example. University of Barcelona, students went on strike to get the campus to require climate change classes of all students. And they succeeded. That's now part of the curriculum. My point is, you need to anticipate pushback. You anticipate some kind of degrees, not just of opposition to climate action, but for support. Now, all of that is internal. Everything I've described is part of the processes of colleges and universities working. Now, think about your role in the broader world. So in terms of town-gown relations, I've been experiencing many stories and sharing stories of individual campuses that are trying to partner with their community for everything from jointly setting up a solar panel station to having a shared cooling center for summer, to researchers doing research into the community, and so on. There are a lot of possibilities for this that can be very mutually productive, as well as a lot of opportunities for friction. Beyond the town-gown relationship, think about how your campus works in the world as a whole. Do you have any faculty or staff who have a public intellectual role in this? That is, do they give talks to NPR? Do they have a popular TikTok channel, et cetera? How do you support them, especially when there's political blowback? Do you help lead mitigation efforts? So for example, if you're in New York, do you help the state with the construction of the Climate Center on Governor's Island? If you're in Boston, do you help with the creation of that amazing seawall project they're building right now? Beyond this, one thing I haven't touched on, and perhaps in many ways one of the most visible signs of climate change, is climate migration. As you have areas around the world that are becoming more and more dangerous to life. So you think of parts of the Middle East, parts of sub-Saharan Africa, Central America, where people are just going to move to get away from areas where the temperature is too dangerous. Where they go, the numbers they move, we're talking about millions of people. In terms of academics, we have to think to what extent we're prepared to either physically host such migrants or to teach them either in person or online. Now, to do all this, do we partner with other campuses around the world to either share results, share best practices, or to try to combine resources? And beyond that, whatever we decide to do, others will make decisions for us. Did any of you see the 2023 Sunnyvale Declaration? You did. One person. That's okay. You were the first person to answer yes to that question in a year and a half of me talking about this. So what you're looking at is a document about the circular economy, which is an idea of changing the political economy in response to climate change. And listen to this one part of it. Our two nations think that we should have a policy dialogue on these topics and support enterprises, universities, and research institutions in researching these. Who are the two parties? The United States and China. This is a top-level diplomatic agreement from 2023. It never appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Ed. It never appeared in Inside Higher Ed. I have yet to see anybody else talking about this in high-level conversations, but it is there. My point is, nations will make decisions for us along this count, and we have to be prepared for that. So, complex problem, lots of moving parts, many ways of approaching this, and it will differ from institution to institution. Now, let me just hit fast forward on this and take you into the future a little further out. One of the things I found is that most of academia is not really taking climate change seriously. Most universities and colleges where I've been visiting and talking, we have people who either oppose action or just don't do anything of it. No one is denying the climate crisis is happening. Instead, they're just kind of getting used to it. Hence the boiled frog idea. That every year we see more storms, say in Florida or South Carolina. We hear about more epic fires in California. We hear about 100-degree temperatures in Duluth, and we just keep going and moving on. When I've asked presidents, when I've asked faculty, when I've asked staff, why aren't you doing something about this? I get some interesting responses. Often they tell me about political risks. Now this is before Trump and before Gaza. They told me that they were very frightened of political blowback with very little upside. I've heard faculty and staff say they would love to, but they were overwhelmed with cause X. They are defending their field. They're fighting for trans rights, or they're anti-racist. I've heard many faculty and staff say they're simply exhausted. They're burned out from COVID, from Trump, from their institution's financial uncertainty. I've seen some faculty and staff that describe themselves to me as being in a kind of defensive crouch, where what they want to do is protect what they've got. They want to protect their English department. They want to make sure their campus is surviving. They're not interested in trying something new. And some of them just don't see anything they can do. I mean, if you ask an adjunct faculty member, they might be shopping with cloth bags. If you talk to a tenured full professor, they've got a Prius now. But it's hard for them sometimes to see what action they can take. And the action might have to come from you directly, or from the top, from the presidents. This is a comment by a Dartmouth University columnist, Josh Kim. I just want to read parts of this to you. For a university leader to prepare their school for the impacts of climate change, they would have to be willing to elevate climate risk mitigation, both in investments of time and institutional status. Two big claims. Understanding the risks that climate change poses to the university, and then developing plans to reduce the harm to students, faculty, and staff once climate-related events occur should be at the core of institutional priorities and leadership operations. Think about that call. As you look towards the climate change crisis getting worse and becoming more intense, is it at the core of your planning? Okay, let's advance the clock a little further. Let's look a little further ahead, maybe 5 years plus. maybe 11, a generation out. Think about Generation Z becoming your faculty and staff. That's a bit of an ask, I know, but think about that, right? And think about their world. So for them, sea level rise is just something they track. That's just been happening and continuing. For them, they've experienced changes in the natural world. They've experienced changes in the human world, the political world. For them, they're accustomed to seeing different flora, different plants. Weather crises being epically dangerous are part of their life. They've probably experienced some damage in their lifetime. And more of their education has moved online, either in order to avoid physical damage or to reduce CO2 footprint. For them, they might be thinking about geoengineering. That is, massive technological attempts to reduce the amount of light and heat coming into the world system. They might be thinking about this. They might be opposing it, or they might be developing it. For them, political chaos and uncertainty, states of emergency, political unrest, caused or accelerated by climate change, is just part of life. And for them, they're used to hearing about migration in millions of people. And for them, they're kind of split about where to go next. Perhaps they think that the thing to do now is focus all of our attention on repairing the world. We need to fix the climate crisis. We need to fix the people who are harmed by it, thinking about climate justice. We're going to need to tamp down our space program. We're going to need to shrink back our footprint as a civilization. But then others of this faculty and staff population will say, no. What we need to do is double down on innovation and creativity. We're very clever creatures, humans. We should invent new technologies, new medicines, new ways of being. We should expand into space. These two attitudes coming out of climate change are incommensurate. They're very opposed, and you'll see them start to appear. They'll be asking questions too. They'll be wondering about a reckoning for higher education. What role did we play in making the crisis happen? That might seem like a strange thing to ask, but think about how many petroleum engineers higher education has produced. Think about how many CEOs and financial officers who helped speed the way of the climate crisis. Think about how many political science and government graduates went on to support this from happening. How are we going to process that as a kind of climate reckoning? Further out still. Imagine Generation Z as trustees. Imagine them as presidents. Imagine them as retiring senior faculty. And I want you to imagine them thinking back to us in 2024. Are they going to think about us as wise ancestors who saw what was happening and did good stuff, that they could honor what we did, our work, our sacrifices? Or are they going to look back at us and think we were morons? We were dangerously stupid, that we knew exactly what was happening and we did the wrong thing. It's a question you get in climate activism a lot, which is, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Now, a lot of this is daunting, and I want to give you one particular flavor of inspiration. The sheer scope of the climate crisis is so vast and so challenging that philosophers have actually come up with a new term to describe it called hyperobject. And one of the benefits of that is it makes you rethink a lot of our lives now, what we do, everything from transportation to energy to food to religion to gender. And in that is a huge opportunity for imagining a better world. In fact, there's a whole design school called solar punk, which likes to imagine, all right, how can we make this crisis turn into the best possible world for humanity? And if you Google image search for solar punk, you'll see images like this. Cities that are literally, as well as conceptually, very green. You can see plants growing on the walls, on rooftops. You can see a river that's part of the city, like in Venice. It's in many ways a soothing and optimistic view of the future. Now, I've been working on how to apply solar punk to campus designs. I've worked with campus architects for several years, but I also asked generative AI to give me images of how it imagines a solar punk college or a solar punk university would look. And here is one, an urban university. You can see it's covered with trees, which of course have the benefit of sequestering carbon, as well as cooling the area. And you can see a lot of solar panels on rooftops. This one goes even further still. We've got solar absolutely everywhere. And in fact, at this point, I would imagine that that campus generates so much electricity that they can sell it for a profit. There's a tip for you to think about. Or you go further still. and really immerse a campus in the natural world. My point is not to say, go forth and do likewise. This is the template for the future. My point is to say, you have a lot of possibilities opening up through climate change. Now is the time to think about this and to take action. And when I say you, I mean deans, because you play this institutional leadership role. But also think about your institutions. Think about the sheer intellectual horsepower involved of faculty in architecture, art, in sociology, in politics, faculty in physics, who can help you think through this future. Faculty and staff and students. So, I gave you some reasons for thinking about all of this. I hope you decide to act upon them. Now, we have about 3 minutes for questions, which is not enough time because we have to go run and do this program. But we have a session tomorrow morning where I would love to hear more about this. And of course, if you're curious about this, I've got a stack of universities on fire there. But let me just quickly ask, what are some questions you have about everything I've done? And if I've gone too quickly, if you want me to come back to something, I really can. I see a hand there, please.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm going to project. Oh, there's a mic. Sorry. My bad. Thank you so much for your talk. And I have to say, I think it's brilliant that the Dean's Association had you speak at lunch. So we all had to hear what you had to say, whether we agree or not. So that's pretty brilliant. I'm having an issue where higher admin doesn't necessarily see the value in this, and I'm trying to figure out the strategies around how we make this crucial topic. And what I've come upon is the students. I would love to hear your thoughts on how things have successfully moved forward in other university contexts. Is it through the students, or what do you recommend?
The students should be crucial, and thank you very much for the question, especially the food angle, which I really approve of. When I've given talks at universities and associations over the past few years, one of the things I find is that faculty, staff, and administration who are, say, 30-plus ages will respond and think about this. But who comes to the stage afterwards are the students. And in fact, AV staff and environmental staff and event staff who are under 30 will come to me and say, I wasn't supposed to be here at all, but I want to know more. I want to do this. There's a crying need from Generation Z for climate materials, for climate action, for climate therapy, for climate classes, study climate degrees, climate careers. I think we're faced with declining enrollment as a nation. This would be a great way to boost enrollment. We're worried about the mental health crisis of Generation Z. Well, by God, let's give them something they can do. Let's help them think about this. And this can go wrong in all kinds of ways. I mean, offering classes can always backfire, right? And mental health is always a risky area. But I think this is one really crucial way of retaining students, making students happier, and perhaps if you push that into the world, to attract more students. So I think that's one key fact. But I think another is creating a welcoming environment for your faculty and staff to talk about this. I've heard from president after president in private, they won't commit to this on the record, saying they're interested in climate, but they don't hear a push from it for their faculty. And they think it's too risky to try and push it towards the faculty. So I think as deans, one of the things you can do is make a space for that. And it might be a physical space, Friday afternoon talks in the library, for example, or just to start talking about this yourself. Have speakers come on campus, have student projects, so that faculty and staff who are concerned about this, who are passionate about this, feel they can ask you, well, they can ask you for money, but also they can ask you for all kinds of support. Pick an academic field, pick someone in religious studies, or pick someone in chemistry who's like, I'm excited about this. I'm terrified of climate. I want to do something about this as a professor, as a researcher, or as a teacher. How can you help me? Being able to have them ask that question and then to answer it, that's a dean's mission, I think. Great questions. Thank you. How are we doing for time? We are almost out of time. One last question? Yes, ma'am. Sorry, there are two sets of lights that are really, really bright, so I think I'm talking to shadows in vague forms. I hope you see them too. Please.
Hi.
She disappeared. Oh,
hi,
hi,
I'm over here. Yeah. Hi, my name is Mary Ann. I'm an associate dean at East Carolina University in North Carolina.
Hi.
And I'm interested in your thoughts on connections between misinformation and the climate crisis. In North Carolina, we saw a lot of kind of conspiracy theories with Hurricane Helene, which impacted the western part of our state. And that strikes me also as an area where universities have a lot to contribute to critical thinking and combating misinformation. So I was interested in the misinformation seems like one way that people who don't accept climate change are coping with it.
Well, first of all, my sympathies to your state, which was clobbered very badly and is still digging out, at times almost literally. I think this is one function that higher education can play either in town-gown relations or in the broader stage. So it might be that you have and I'm just going to make this up for your institution, an especially outgoing earth scientist who then gets to appear on local TV, or who then cuts a few TikToks, or does something in public in order to share, well, this is actually what's happening. This is really what FEMA is doing. This is how much rain you should expect, that kind of thing. But also to teach your students, and also faculty and staff to some extent, how to sift this information out, how to recognize climate disinformation. I mean, some of it is cartoonishly stupid. When you had some politicians who were saying, oh yeah, the Democrats have a hurricane generating machine. I mean, it's like something from G.I. Joe. It's great to think about, right? But more subtle problems. Errors, again, some of the conspiracies around FEMA, some of the problems that occurred around assessing temperature or about storms, that's the kind of thing that's a function we can fulfill. It's a service we can provide, I think, for the community. That'll just be better for everybody. I think as generative AI, I'll talk about this a bit more tomorrow, generates more and more, among other things, disinformation or just confusion, I think higher education has the capacity to play the role as the trusted information partner. The people who are more trustworthy than anyone else. Thank you. I have to change all of this now. We're going to put on the Future Trends Forum session right now, and that's going to be a completely different topic, but one that should be dear to your hearts, which is new information about college enrollment. So first of all, I want to just quickly thank everybody for your attention. Thank you. Thank you for the questions. If you'd like to take a look at some copies of the books, I have them here in the front, so you have to get past a thicket of dessert and nice people. But otherwise, we're going to start this off. So I'm going to talk through how this happens. If you have to leave, I understand. We also have 3 good guests who can join us up on stage as they go. So let me switch this over right now. And if I manage to break the sound system, like I'm easily capable of doing, we will switch this over to another room. There's nothing quite like watching somebody type in a field on a computer screen. Thank you very much. There we go. So what you're looking at is a weekly live video conversation. How many of you have seen this Future Trends Forum before? Oh, excellent. I'm so glad to see those hands. Thank you. This is a conversation between a guest or several guests, as well as an audience of dozens or hundreds of people about some aspect of the future of higher education. So every week we host somebody who has some particular part of that puzzle. It might be a librarian talking about libraries. It might be a government official talking about grants. It might be a research scientist talking about finance, and so on. And the way we do this is by having a complete organic conversation without any formal presentation as such. Now, I'm going to start talking to the online audience, and so I'm going to try and make sure I talk to both of you at the same time. Think of this as a blended or a hybrid situation. So first of all, welcome to everybody on the Future Trends Forum. Just quick show of hands of those of you who are online or in the chat, if you can tell me if you can hear me all right. Now, what you should be able to see here,
You have to put them on the stage.
Yeah, okay, put them on the stage as well. Excellent. Let's see if we can get this up here. And thank you, three, for waiting patiently. Kind of nightmarish situation seeing two of me. It's already historical. Okay, and they can hear us, very good. So our virtual audience has about 41 people, and our in-person audience has 3 nice interlocutors on stage, plus dozens or hundreds of people in the audience. Just everyone in the audience, if you just say hi, just say hello. And everyone online is like, what is going on? So let me quickly explain for everybody who's new to this. First, welcome to the Future Trends Forum. This is a conversation about the future of higher education devoted to the idea that only through conversations with multiple people, multiple perspectives, can we best engage with the future of higher education. So really quickly, just to introduce things, we've been doing this program for now almost 9 years, week after week. And we've been trying to do this in order to really give a better sense of where higher education is going, but also to try and have better conversation in general online. With me online, for the online audience, is my excellent colleague, Wesson Radomski, who's there to help you if you have any technical issues or technical challenges. Now, we have, again, this is just a quick introduction. Like I said, we've been doing this for almost 9 years. So on YouTube, we now have 425 or so recordings stacked up. And if you want to take a look at them, you can go to tinyurl.com/ftfarchive. And if you want to go to our website, we organize them all by topic. So if you want to look for any kind of discussion about copyright, about libraries, about pedagogy, presidential leadership, state policy, the digital divide, and so on, you can just go there. Just go to forum.futureofeducation.us. We have a whole series of topics coming up that might excite or interest you. We have a session coming up on the right to learn, which is now pretty controversial, a session on reforming grading, which I think one session here in Austin talked about this morning, and also a discussion about educability, what that concept might be. Now, we can only do this with the help of some generous sponsors. So those of you who are online, we're here at the CCAS event, and we already thanked sponsors in person. So I have to thank our sponsors who are helping us online, including NYSERDAT in New York State. Quick show of hands. How many of you here in the face-to-face audience are from New York? All right. Dead silence for them, though. No one's like, woo! They're like, yeah, I'm from New York. Make something of it. I'm a native New Yorker, so I can do this. NYSERDAT does great work with getting colleges online, and they also do great professional development. I also wanted to thank Shindig. This is the technology that we use right here. So for those of you who are in the face-to-face audience, as well as those of you who are online who are new to this, let me just quickly explain how it works and how to make it work for you. The screen is split into 2. The top part of the screen is the stage. Everybody can see and hear everything that goes on stage. In particular, thanks to our awesome AV guys. Thank you to Justin, and thank you to... we also have the second half of the stage, the bottom part, which is all kinds of people. And you can mouse over them and find out who they are and learn more about them. In fact, for the online world, people can double-click on someone and have a kind of audio-visual bubble. They can have a private conversation. But for those of you who are online, how do you participate? On the bottom of the screen, you should see a couple of boxes. One of them is a number. And if you click on that, you get a chat box into which people can chat. So let me just multitask to the ultimate level right now. If people could introduce themselves who are online by saying who they are and where they're from. So I'll just say, I'm using a keyboard that doesn't work for my fingers. No, I'm Bryan in Austin, Texas. And people who are online can also ask questions by clicking the question mark button on that white strip. And if you want to join us on stage virtually, they can click the raised hand button, and I'll beam them up. And hello to people who are online, Kathleen in Silver Spring, Maryland, Wesson in Pennsylvania, Megan Kuntz in Alaska, in New Zealand right now. Good morning, Megan, I think. And Colin, hello in Austin. Funny to meet you here. Hello, Santa Barbara, and people in Utah, and so on. All kinds of good people. Now, we're really grateful to Shindig for making that available. And we're also grateful to our sponsors on Patreon who help us keep all of our work going. They help us create all this technology and pay for it, and also help keep all the lights running. We're really grateful to all of them. Okay, now what we're going to do is have the actual program itself, and I will stop throwing slides at you, because that's the important thing, is to get rid of slides. What we have is a major topic that we've been talking about for years and years in the forum, and of course, which everybody here at the Dean's Conference has been thinking about forever, which is how enrollment is changing in higher education. And we've been covering this since enrollment peaked in 2012, and one of the best sources for enrollment information, and just a really good source of people to talk to, is the National Student Clearinghouse. We have their research director, currently vice president for research and executive director, Doug Shapiro, and I'm going to bring him up on stage right now to ask him about his new research. And for those of you who are online, as well as those of you who are looking at the screen, you should see on the bottom left of the screen a little button. That's a link to Doug's newest research effort right now. Good afternoon, Doug. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
With absolute delight in my heart. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, I'm just fabulous right now. And where are you today? Are you in New York?
I'm in New York. I'm at home in Brooklyn.
Ah, very good, very good. Well, hello, greetings from Austin, Texas. We'll be at the CCAS event, where you have a room full of deans who are now partially figuring out what's going on, but they will have questions for you, as well as our online audience, who will have lots of questions as well. So first thing, Doug, I just want to ask, this is the question I always ask you when you come on the program. What are you working on for the next year? What are the projects that are top of mind for you?
Well, let me start by saying top of mind, we're always the most focused on just getting the important facts out about what's happening in higher ed enrollments and students and institutions, so that we are informing colleges and universities in particular, but also policymakers and students and families and their advisors about what's really going on out there beyond their campus or beyond their home state or region, so that they can make decisions that are timely and positive for educational access and opportunity for all students who need it. We are this year in particular, we're really focused on what's happening with freshmen, particularly 18-year-old freshmen, or new high school graduates and low-income students generally, including institutions that serve large numbers or high shares of financial aid recipients, Pell recipients in particular. This is something that we haven't focused on a lot in the past, but I think has really risen to a more urgent area of concern and
Yes.
salience in particularly this term, because, as you all know, a lot of concerns about the situation with the FAFSA, both last year and this coming year, and also just a lot of new questions about the cost and value of college and concerns about what's happening in the workforce that are, I think, changing students and families' thinking about higher education generally. And so these kinds of concerns, not to mention the whole change in affirmative action from the Supreme Court's decision, just a whole host of headwinds that just seem to be really focused on freshmen this year. And so we're going to keep our kind of magnifying glass on that subgroup in particular.
Thank you.
Just one more point though, because a little bit longer term, we're also hoping to work to extend our work from a couple of years ago that looked at college closures and what kind of impacts that had on students when their colleges closed, how many students were able to transfer to another institution and eventually complete a degree. And as you all know, there have been some levels of acceleration of closures, partly due to the pandemic, but other factors as well. And so again, there's more concern about what's going on with college closures and how that's affecting students. Another thing that we're looking to focus on. That'll probably be later this year or even early next year, though.
Doug, you've just described a research agenda for a small army. I'm so glad that you're on the case because you singular, but also you plural, your whole team, you do such great work. Friends, I'm going to ask Doug a couple of questions just to start rolling the topic about the latest research into enrollment numbers. But then I'm going to turn it over to all of you for your questions. So first, not right this second, but in a few minutes, my wonderful three deans here on the stage may have some questions, but also people online. So again, as you're listening to Doug and I talk, especially Doug, think about the questions that you might have. And if you haven't had a chance to see the report, again, look in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen where you can see that little tan-colored lozenge. That'll be a link to it itself. Doug, one of the things that I find really heartening and impressive about the data that you shared recently is that enrollment in this fall semester seems to have really improved across a number of registers. Something like 40-odd states that you had data for across almost all sectors, definitely across people of color, both genders rising at the same amount. It seemed like overall, we're talking about a 2.9% increase in the student body. This just sounds like a real relief after years and years of decline. Is my picture accurate so far?
Well, yes and no. I mean, we in many ways, this report was very puzzling, and one of those ways is at the top level, where we saw, as you just described, a very healthy 3% increase in the total number of students enrolled as undergraduates. But at the same time, the number of new incoming freshmen, first-time students of all ages, has declined by even more. So a 5% decline in in freshmen, a 6.5% decline in 18-year-old freshmen, so new high school graduates essentially, and even steeper declines for freshmen at four-year institutions. It's more like 8%. Wow. So yeah, it's very much a good news, bad news. I mean, I think certainly, schools are from the perspective of the colleges and universities, having more total undergraduates enrolled is a good thing. But I think in the longer term, this sharp decline in freshmen this year, that's going to persist as it works. That class works its way through the undergraduate pipeline. There will be constrained undergraduate numbers just from this class alone for several to more years to come.
Good news and bad news indeed. It's really good to see that healthy increase, but that first-year student drop. I know you've been asked this before, but I've got to ask: could you speculate a bit? I know your job is to collect the data and to analyze it very closely, but I'm wondering if you just for a moment speculate about some of the reasons for that 18-year-old drop, why we have 7+% fewer of those students coming to campus.
Well, I hate to use this cliche about a perfect storm, but there really was so many factors converging that I think all could have contributed, and it's certainly hard to know how much of this decline is due to any one of them. I think there's no question that there have been students that were forced off of their plan due to circumstances like the difficulties in in the financial aid application, whether that meant they couldn't apply at all, or their application got in late, or their school's ability to package and award their aid came too late for them to be able to make a reasonable choice and a commitment to enroll. I think there's also a lot of students who are probably actively making a different choice. So not by force, but for their own futures, for what they see as their needs in terms of post-secondary, whether it's vocational, choosing vocational programs at community colleges instead of four-year schools, or choosing to go directly into the workforce where they're able to, in many cases, see higher wages than they would have expected in previous years. And compared to the growing costs of college, that's looking like a better option for many students. And the third possibility is that there are probably, in many cases, in some regions and some demographics, there are probably just fewer of those high school graduates to begin with this year. And you put all those three things together, and you can see kind of traces of each of those effects in some of the specific data points that we were able to identify in our report. And so I think there's certainly all three of those things are going on. Some of them have been going on for years, and we just can't really say how to quantify how much of this decline in freshmen is due to any one of those causes.
Understood. I mean, that's going to be the work of researchers for some time, I think. Friends, I have lots of questions for Doug, but I want to defer them over to you. And so I would love to hear, first of all, I'm going to tell the online audience, please, what questions you have, either type them in the Q&A box or click the raised hand button to join us on the virtual stage. And for those of you who are in person who can't hear those questions because they're occurring on the screen, I'll read them out loud so everyone can see them. I'd also like to hear from my three wonderful guests on the stage. Do any one of you have a question right now? Yeah, please, seize the mic. And you should identify yourself.
I'm Deborah Feeks. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Texas A&M San Antonio.
Doug, can you hear her okay?
Great. I am a chemist by training, and the American Chemical Society publication, Chemical and Engineering News, recently put out an article saying that the number of chemistry majors had decreased by about 24%. It was huge in the STEM field over the last 5 years or so. And I'm curious if your data is drilled down enough to say, what majors are growing? Are there majors growing? What majors are declining? And if we're going to offset the decline in freshmen, are there majors that you think would be particularly good to be looking at and reviewing for growth?
Great question. Please go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, we certainly do have details by majors, and if you look at our report, you can separate out, you can choose the program level, so you can look at majors, the top gainers and losers for the largest majors in bachelor's degree programs, in associate degree programs, and even in undergraduate certificate programs. And I would say the biggest gains were certainly not in the natural sciences.
Wow.
They were in business, in health, in engineering, and even in some of the social services programs. The biggest losers, which has been continuing for some time, are liberal arts and the humanities, social sciences, English language and literatures. and and computer science this year has kind of slowed to pretty much flat at all three of those levels after many years of really strong growth. So I think I honestly don't actually know about chemistry. That's not one of the bigger majors, so it doesn't show up in our list of, which I think is like the top 20 or something. Um, um, but I don't doubt that what you have described for Texas is probably 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 taking place nationally as well.
Great question. Thank you. Great answer too. Please. Hi.
Hello, my name is Melinda Roberts, and I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Indiana State University. So when we look at enrollment trends across Indiana, obviously we've all been worried and looking into the future about the demographic cliff. But we often say in Indiana, we already hit it because we have one of the lowest college going rates right now in the country. And last I checked, we're getting pretty close to about 50%. And so when we look at that, of course, there's a whole host of reasons, and you've noted some of them. People are challenging the idea and the value of a college education. Industry and business leaders in the state have encouraged students, high school students, to just go on into the career fields and things such as that. So I guess my question for you is, as you're looking at states that are similar to this and that have those lower college going rates, that had sudden drops really in the last 10 years, are they going to be affected more substantially by the demographic cliff as well, or are they already there?
Great question.
I think we're already seeing some of those effects. If you look nationally, the cliff is not supposed to have begun yet. In fact, 24 or 25 was projected to be the kind of apex. And the declines wouldn't start until a year at the next year and all the following years. But when you look at that by region of the country, it's a very different picture emerges, and there you have almost all the growth is in the South and the West, and areas in the Midwest and the Northeast have already started to decline. And so we're certainly seeing that in this year's numbers. We saw it in last year's numbers, and it also shows up in the race and ethnicity breakdowns. So one of the really surprising findings in this fall, particularly for freshmen, was that the number of white students, it just stands out as a major source of decline in freshmen this year. And all the all the other race and ethnic categories are also falling, but by much smaller percentages. So the whites are dropping by like 10 or 11%. And if you look at Black and multiracial students, they're both falling by only about 6%. And then Hispanic and Asian students are even smaller, less, like 1-2%. And again, that reflects the demographics, because when you break out the projections, and these are the projections that came from WICHE back in 2020, so there's a lot that's changed since then. But just in terms of the number of births 18 years back, that's pretty solid. The number of white students expected to graduate from high school has been declining very slowly by about 1% a year for a number of years now in the projections. And while Hispanic students and Asian students have been increasing, and Black students have been essentially flat for several years. So that is real. And what's what's harder to understand in that dynamic, though, is the effect of the pandemic, which I think you've heard about uh, um, um, learning losses in high school and elementary school. You've heard about absenteeism in K-12, and and I think a lot of that is probably leading to um, kind of educational burnout among students, even if they are graduating on time. Um, they it seems to me that many of them just wouldn't be all too excited about signing up for another 4 years of school after probably a horrible high school experience during the pandemic. This, of course, is the first class that would have spent all of their high school years in the pandemic era, starting in ninth grade in fall of 2020. So that could also be having an effect at this point in why we see the numbers of 18-year-old freshmen declining by much larger percent than what the demographic projections suggest it should have been based on those pre-pandemic estimates.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you for that great answer to this excellent question. Thank you so much. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes, please. There's a gentleman there with a beard and a red tie. I don't want to lose you. Can you stick around for 5 more minutes? Excellent. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a very quick question. I'm Abdallah Midouche. I'm the Dean of the College of Science and Technology at North Carolina A&T State University. What you are telling us and what we see in numbers pushes us to think about retention effort within our universities and colleges, and basically fixing the so-called leaking pipeline. What do you? How far can the retention effort go in fixing the enrollment decline in numbers that we do see? I know that this year, for instance, freshman class was down 5%, but the overall enrollment went up slightly due to retention. So how far can these retention efforts go to fixing this problem?
Yeah. Really good question. I love this question. We have a separate report that focuses on persistence and retention. And when we released our last edition of that report this past spring, we found that retention and persistence, so including students who are still in college but have transferred to another school, those rates both went up by about 1%, and that's been a trend for the last couple of years. So there's certainly a lot more room for improvement in retention and persistence. The overall rates for a freshman class are only like 70 some odd percent, and yet I think if you really contemplate the amount of effort that's been going into improving retention on campuses across the country in the last few years, and particularly schools that are using technology and really trying to proactively identify students who might be at risk of leaving, and reaching out with personal appeals and counseling and assistance to try and help them stay in. I'm surprised that it hasn't that needle hasn't moved more. And so I think it's certainly a success story so far, and there's no question it's been a huge part of the increase in total undergraduates this year, as you said. But I don't know that it's. Well, I guess I would say I'm not optimistic that the progress that we've made in the last few years can grow much more. I would also add, I think another important part of what's contributing to the total undergraduate increase this year, on top of retention, is colleges that are also doing a better job of attracting or bringing students back who have stopped out. So these are students that we call some college no credential. They've been out of the classroom for at least 18 months in our report. And we update this number every year, and there are over 40 million Americans out there who fall into this some college no degree or no credential category.
Wow.
And we also found in our latest report this year that the number of those returning after a stop out of at least a year and a half and re-enrolling had increased this year. So that's an important contributor as well.
Thank you. That was a great question. And thank you, Doug, for that excellent answer. Thank you. And now, hello.
Hi, I'm David Bowman. I'm the Dean of the College of STEM at Eastern Washington University.
And you just stepped in front of me, Bowman.
No, I was here first, dude.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
No, I'm teasing.
Already the abuse. I mean.
Yeah. I used to work for her. Dual enrollment is a big and growing trend across the nation, and in some states, it's already a massive tsunami. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that in terms of enrollment when we have students showing up on campus that have already completed 60, 90, or even more semester credits. What the heck does a four-year degree even mean anymore?
Thank you.
Absolutely. This is an important dimension as well. We've been tracking very large annual increases in dual enrollment for high school students. 7% this year. I think it was 8, maybe even 9% last year. So these numbers are really growing, and that is also when we talk about the total undergraduate students, that conversation about persistence and returning from stopouts, you can add on, because we're also counting dual enrollments in that total undergraduate number. And so that's a contributor. It's still relatively small. The total size of that population is small relative to all undergraduates, but the growth rates are huge, and I think those will continue. The question that I worry about is that it looks like more students, and a lot of people claim that getting high school students taking college classes earlier while still in high school will increase the college going rate in the long run. I'm not convinced at all of that. I think that for the most part, dual enrolled high school students are students who were already on their way to college regardless. And the dual enrollment is just accelerating their path to a degree. It's saving them money. I'm not saying it's not a great thing, but I don't think it's actually drawing more students into the college pipeline than there would have been. And in fact, if you're a college or a university, like you just said, it's shortening the amount of time that they are eventually going to be on your campus. If you're awarding them 30 or 60 credits before they even arrive, you're not going to get 4 years of enrollment out of them.
Yeah, but I think the mic is quiet.
Oh, there, they shut it off on me. Maybe I'm not allowed to. So just one quick follow-up on that. Do you see a difference in trends for where those dual enrollment students are going? Are they at big regional flagships, R1s, or are they going to regional institutions? Because the impact is vastly different depending on the kind of institution we're talking about receiving them.
Yeah, we haven't actually tracked that, but the researchers at Teachers College, Columbia, The Community College Research Center have just done exactly that. Using our data, they've put out a very a thorough report on where do those students go. And the first finding is that they don't typically stay at the community college. So most of the dual enrollments are at community colleges. But when those students finish high school, they don't end up enrolling as associate degree students at those community colleges. They're going on to four-year institutions. And your question is good. I don't know the answer whether it's the flagships or the small regionals or what have you. I don't know, but it is an interesting question.
Well,
I think there may also be some differences in terms of states which have different policies, and some that have encouraged almost all students to take dual or enabled them to take dual enroll courses, and that would be a change to what I said earlier about, this is really just a self-selected bunch of students who were probably headed for the more selective four-year colleges anyway, and that those kind of statewide initiatives might actually have a longer term effect of adding to the pipeline.
Oh, thank you. And if anyone in the chat wants to find that Columbia Teachers College study, please share a link to it. Thank you for the question. And now we have a question from our outgoing president. Is this true?
It's true, yes.
Oh, I need to
They don't let provosts stick around. So good afternoon. I'm Leslie Cornick. I was Dean of the School of STEM at University of Washington Bothell, and I actually used to work for him at Eastern Washington. And I'm currently the provost at Chico State. And I was sent a very interesting document this morning, and this goes back to the question about closing equity gaps in STEM. So this is a report from the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, ranking member the esteemed recently reelected Ted Cruz, entitled DEI, Division, Extremism, Ideology, How the Biden-Harris National Science Foundation Politicized Science. And it, has all kinds of interesting data on the status of grant recipients in terms of, filtering language about social justice, gender, race, environmental justice, and so on. And I wonder if you could speak to the potential impact of that kind of report, given the recent results of the election, in further clogging up, tightening, cutting in half, whatever metaphor you would like to use, of the entree of minoritized students into our STEM degrees, as well as the awarding of NSF grant funds to faculty from minoritized populations and women.
Excellent. Doug, were you able to hear all of that okay?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Good. I'm still trying to unpack some of it in my mind. That's a huge question, and I don't have much of an answer for you, unfortunately. I mean, I think just in terms of what we're seeing this fall, I'm surprised that the numbers of underrepresented students has held up as well as it has.
Yeah.
In fact, we saw smaller declines. So certainly compared to white students, as I described, but also when we look at students from the lowest income quintiles, that had, in many cases, the smallest declines. Compared to more higher income students. So I think that, the change to the affirmative action has not had the expected effect, I think. And I think that although there's one caveat there, is that when we looked specifically this year at HBCU institutions, we did see larger gains in undergraduates and freshmen there than at colleges and universities more generally. So there may have been some effect of students opting for an HBCU where they might otherwise have gone to a more traditional institution. That's about all I can offer there. We don't break out the specific majors in terms of race and ethnicity. So it's very hard to know whether that's having a larger or smaller effect in the sciences.
Well, thank you, Doug, for the. One of the things I love about hosting you as a guest is that you are always so honest about how far you want to go in answering a question based on the work that you do. And thank you for the terrific question. A couple of comments came up in the chat. I just want to make sure we shared. Our good friend Tom Hames, not too far away from us in Katy, Texas, says that as a professor in a community college who teaches dual credit students, a lot of the students in Texas see it as a good alternative to advanced placement and are heading to senior institutions from there. Also in the chat, Ruben Puentedura, our excellent friend, found that Columbia study that Doug mentioned and shared a link to it in the chat, so we can grab that. We have a couple more questions that have come up online. I just want to bring them up. One was a quick question from the excellent Moira McDermott, who wants to know, how does gender show up in the numbers? And if I remember rightly, Doug, male and female enrollment increased about the same amount this fall?
Yeah, very little distinction between men and women in the numbers this fall. And I don't...
In terms of the change, but they still remain roughly 60-40?
Yeah. Oh, the total percentages, yes, 60-40, but in terms of the percent change from last year in freshmen, they're within, less than a percentage point of each other.
Thank you. We've got another question in the chat, but I'm wondering, are there any questions from our in-person audience here? Or any questions from our wonderful guests on the stage? Please seize the mic.
All right. Okay. Hi, this is Melinda Roberts again. I was going to ask a question about what you're seeing in international enrollments. Obviously, as visa times are taking a lot longer, and we've noticed it in particular in India and Ghana and a few other places where we would have a lot of students coming. What are you seeing this year, and what do you anticipate?
Yeah, we saw certainly a larger decline in international enrollments this year. We don't have that broken down by nation, but I think that is a concern. I think from what I've heard, there's a lot of decline of students, fewer students coming from China and India as well.
And that's. I'm looking ahead a bit. I mean, as the futurist here, I'm saying, I'm not sanguine about where that goes. It's a good question, really good question. We have another question from the chat, which had to do with regional differences. Again, this is from Bart Trudeau, who says, in New York State, 18-year-olds are declining in most areas except New York City. Are similar trends happening nationwide with rural suburban declines and urban growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I certainly don't know about what's happening with high school graduates at that level, but we haven't seen a huge disparity in enrollments for urban versus rural students. A little bit where the increases this year, I think, were larger for urban than rural, but they certainly all increased.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. And this is, again, Bart, that's a really good question to ask. We have a question that just popped in from Tanaya Sengel, who asks, are the rising costs of student accommodation options leading to a decline in international students coming overseas for higher education? That's an interesting one.
That is interesting. I don't have any information that would relate to that I can think of.
Tanaya, keep following that. See, we'd love to hear from that. We have a video, not a video question, but we have a question that I'm going to display on the screen from our excellent friend, the wonderful Robin DeRosa in New England. And she asks this: my college's board of trustees is centering enrollment planning around Grau's demographic model and the idea that we're about to hit a cliff. Now, critics like Neil Krauss refute Grau's dire predictions. What thoughts do you have? We already mentioned the demographic cliff a bit earlier, Doug, but I'm wondering if you want to, if you have anything to add to that about the question of, people saying the cliff may or may not happen. And those of you who are in the room, you can see the question displayed on the screen.
I think from what I don't really have much more to add on that than what I've already talked about in terms of what we see demographically and have seen related to the projections that come from WICHE. And I'm not as familiar with Nathan Grau's numbers, which I think are more focused on the kind of trying to understand not just how many high school graduates there will be, but how many high school graduates that are likely to attend different types of institutions.
Right. That's key.
And so I don't really know how to answer that question.
Okay, but one of our deans might want to answer that question, please.
Oh, no, I don't have an answer to the question.
You have a different
question.
Okay, well, hang on one second. I just want to say thank you, Robin, for the really good question. I believe CCIS is hosting Nathan tomorrow, so that's one question I might be able to put to him. And thank you, Doug. Again, I always appreciate your careful responses. Please go ahead.
I was wondering if this is Deborah Feeks again from A&M San Antonio, and I was wondering if you have tracking on modality. We're getting a lot of discussions at the universities about how we're offering the courses in terms of online. Do you track that at all? Are you seeing differences in success rates, any of those kinds of things around modality?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't track it within institutions. We only have a kind of vague sense of this by separating out what we call primarily online institutions. Actually, iPads, I think, makes this definition, and multi-state institutions, which are typically mostly online as well. And we've certainly seen larger growth, quite a bit larger growth in those online institutions, but there's been a huge growth in brick and mortar institutions that are also offering more of their classes online or giving students choices about whether to attend online or in person. And that level of differentiation we can't we don't track.
But it's really important to see the primarily online institutions just continuing to grow. Yeah, very, very importantly. Doug, related to that, didn't the report find that for-profit colleges did really well this fall?
That's right. Yes. And there's a certain amount of overlap there as well between the online and the for-profits.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We have time for a couple of more questions, and here is another question that asks you to speculate, and this is one that I'm sure will speak to the concerns of every dean here. This is from Tom Hames again, who asks, is there any evidence of students turning away from colleges for ideological reasons and/or the threat of conflict on campus?
I would only be able to speculate on this. One thing that we did look at is if you go on our dashboard online, you can look at a state by state map of the nation and see the relative rates of increase or decrease in enrollments, and it's you can make your own judgments about red states versus blue states. I don't see any pattern there, to be honest. There are regional differences, like I talked about. Growth is certainly visibly higher in the South and the West, and lower in the Northeast and the Midwest. But for ideological differences, I would not even want to speculate. That's a little too sensitive for me.
Oh gosh, that takes off the question I was going to ask then. So I'll just put that question on the table for right now. Please, we have another question in the audience. If you could just introduce yourself first.
Hello, there we go. Okay, hi. So I'm Ray Herbersky, and I'm at IU Indianapolis, Indiana University, Indianapolis. I'm an associate dean in liberal arts. I'm curious about whether or not there's data showing trends, particularly in gender, towards different majors. So we know that there's a split between 60-40 female-male. Do you see an increase in women going to certain majors? Do you see an increase in men going to other majors? I know that engineering seems to be very popular, business is very popular. How are things breaking down? And have we seen a shift over time of women perhaps moving away from certain majors and going into majors that they were not in the last 10 or 15 years?
Good question. Thank you, please.
Yeah, really good question. We don't track that in our annual reports, so I can't really say much about what's happened this year or last year. In the latest trends, we paid more attention to the gender differences in the sciences. Gosh, I think it's been 8 or 10 years since we looked at that, and we found only slight, not very encouraging, only slight changes in say the number of women entering the sciences, and almost no change, in fact, some declines in the number of women entering, say, computer science. But again, this was I think this was in the mid-teens when we last really looked at some of these. So I don't have an answer for you more recently than that.
Well, not only is it a great question, but also our dean, is it Feeks? Feeks, excuse me. You're nodding vigorously. In chemistry, what's the current state of play in gender in chemistry?
There's been a lot of work towards gender equity, and it just doesn't seem to be moving the needle very much in many of the STEM fields.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Doug, you mentioned the fields that were increasing, especially allied health, but I don't remember if you mentioned business as a major. Is that still a major one? Feel free to give the plug.
Yeah, it's still the largest major, and it's one of the biggest gainers this year, certainly, and has been in recent years. I think the other thing that's interesting, though, on the majors is that when we look at the community colleges, and the community colleges actually gained a little bit in freshmen this year, and their overall enrollments have increased faster since the pandemic than the four-year colleges have. Of course, they had a lot further to go. They lost the most during the first couple of years of the pandemic. But when we look at the program level enrollments that are driving that growth in the community colleges, it's very much focused on more vocational programs in the community colleges, and schools that focus more on vocational programs. So both at the kind of school level, like vocational focused community colleges versus more transfer focused or academic focused community colleges, there's been a big difference, much larger growth on the vocational side and smaller on the transfer and academic side. But also at the major level, whether you look at associate degrees or certificates within the community colleges, the vocational programs have been growing much faster than the academic ones.
Well, you mentioned certificates. Ever since your report came out, I've been hearing from faculty across the country saying that their institutions are now considering expanding certificates. We're almost out of time, so I have one last enormous question to ask you. And this is particularly for the audience here. I'm wondering, based on all of your research, your fine-grained knowledge of student enrollment in colleges and universities, do you have any advice or recommendations for the deans assembled here? Anything that they should be paying attention to or working on? And we'll hold you to it, of course.
I really think the most potential, it may not be the easiest path, but I think the most potential is what we talked about earlier, is increasing retention and finding ways to attract stopped out students who had a plan for higher ed, and for whatever reason they got bounced off of that. And I think that there's a ton of potential to find more attractive ways to bring those students back to campus and give them an opportunity to finish what they started.
Thank you. And you said it was something like 13% of the United States population, an absolutely huge number of people. If I could have just a quick round of applause from everybody for Doug and our guests on stage. This has been terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. How do we keep up with you, Doug? What's the best way to keep up with your research at the Clearinghouse?
nscresearchcenter.org. You will always find our latest releases. We're still putting out about 10 to 12 publications every year that are all freely available for the public on our website.
And I read them avidly. Thank you so much, Doug. I can't wait to the next one. Please take care, enjoy New York, and we'll be in touch soon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. And friends, if just to point out where we're headed, thank you all for the great questions. Thank you all to the wonderful people face-to-face as well as online. Many thanks to Yusuf and Justin, who did heroic work in making sure all the AV systems work smoothly. If you want to keep talking about this online, of course, you can see we're available on the socials. Just use the hashtag FTTE. If you'd like to look into our previous sessions, including the ones on enrollment, just go to tinyurl.com/FTF archive. If you'd like to look ahead to our upcoming sessions, just go to the forum website, forum.futureofeducation.us. And thank you all again for all of your participation. I hope everybody stays well in this pretty chaotic time. Now it's back to Austin, Texas for our live sessions. Take care, everybody. See you online next time. Bye-bye. And thank you, everybody. Thank you all. Thank you, and our guest.